Hello and welcome to TVP World. I'm your host, Alex Smolinski, and these are World Talks. Presidents Vladimir Putin of Russia and Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus have signed a pact in Minsk, offering closely guarded security guarantees between Russia and Belarus. Now, the contents of the bilateral security agreement remain unavailable to the public. And just last month, Putin signed a decree lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, which extends Russia's nuclear umbrella to Belarus. And joining us to discuss this further is Franak Viačorka, advisor to exiled Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. Welcome to the program.
Good evening.
So now, Russia and Belarus are bound to each other by a series of agreements and interests. Is today's signed agreement more necessary for Putin or maybe for Alexander Lukashenko?
I think it's important for both dictators. For Lukashenko, it's the guarantee that Russia will continue supporting Lukashenko and his regime in Minsk. And for Lukashenko, and for Putin, it's the guarantee of the control over Belarus. So both dictators basically take advantage of that. Russia basically is fixing its control over Belarus by deploying weapons, by deploying nukes, by tying Belarusian state with the Russian military machine. And I think it will have long-lasting consequences, unfortunately, where 9 million people are basically taken hostage.
So now, just like you mentioned, with the signing of another agreement between these two dictators, you said it's about taking control over Belarus. So do you think, are we maybe going back to the days of the Soviet Union where all major decisions were taken by Moscow?
We can compare it with the Soviet Union. Of course, Putin is dreaming to restore empire and announced himself as the Tsar. But we know how such empires were collapsing when no one was expecting. We remember the collapse of the Berlin Wall. We remember Polish solidarity and then free elections. No one expected a year before that. So the same will be with these agreements. When Lukashenko and Putin regimes will collapse, everyone in a day will forget about these agreements. People will go out to the streets and there will be democratic change. So of course, it's very, very concerning on one hand, but we shouldn't, bury Belarus as the state. Yes, it's the new challenge, and of course, it's a big risk for the region. Definitely, it's the sign of desperation as well for Putin, who didn't achieve big successes in Ukraine as he expected in 2022. So perhaps he's trying also to compensate this by signing these papers with Lukashenko today.
And what about you started speaking about consequences, and I wanted to ask, what are the consequences for Poland and for the region with this next pact signed by these two dictators?
It just means the continuation of the constant provocations that Poland, Lithuania, Latvia were facing in last years, continuous hybrid attacks with migrants, continuous provocations with military. Military drills are planned for next year, probably with the nuclear drills as well. It's the big challenge, and the test for the Western community will be able to mobilize themselves and their defense systems. It also means that Russia will continue using Belarus territory. Every single night, Russian Shaheds, drones, are flying over Belarus. And I think we must be prepared, that Putin will not stop tomorrow. Also, it's the raising the stakes. Putin feels that there will be peace talks, peace negotiations, and he's trying to raise his, improve his position before these talks. And I think that Putin feels that his condition is not the perfect as he expected. So he made, from this visit a big PR action as well.
So now, with this signing of this pact that we are now talking about, do you think it will drag Belarus further into the war that Russia is waging on Ukraine's territory?
A good question. I do not believe that Belarusians will fight against Ukraine. Belarusian people support, in their majority, democratic changes in Belarus, support Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. And Lukashenko's regime, of course, it will continue supporting Putin with military weapons, with the territory. Basically, Lukashenko is giving to Putin everything he already can give to Putin. but I don't believe that the people will be dragged. If they will try to order Belarusians to fight against Ukrainians, it will strike back against the dictators. People will refuse, there will be acts of sabotage, there will be unrest inside Belarusian society. So it's hard to say, how it will change in terms of the practical consequences inside the country, but economy and the military sphere will be more tight for sure.
And in your opinion, just how independent is the Belarusian army?
I was serving in Belarusian army. It was compulsory military service, and I remember that these people are these army people, soldiers, officers. They don't have experience. Even if they will be sent to Ukrainian front, they will not make big change. Many of army officers were anti-Russia already then, 10 years ago, when I used to serve. Many of them did not support Lukashenko and made jokes of Lukashenko. So Lukashenko was not perceived as the real leader. So I think army, it's not something Lukashenko can count on. Lukashenko invested in the police, KGB, KGB, in personal security apparatus, but not in the defense during his 30 years tenure.
And what about, you mentioned at one point that Vladimir Putin, that he's desperate, right? We've also seen him recently acquiring soldiers from North Korea to go fight into Ukraine, now this next pact. So if he is in such a situation, do you think, is there anything that the West can do now at this point to, well, also help the, the democratic cause in Belarus, to help it, to help it come, to help it exist, to help it flourish, and maybe somehow bring down these regimes?
I think that the Western policy for last years was to help Ukraine to sustain, but not to win. And the same with Belarus, helping democratic forces in the movement to sustain, but not to win. Of course, the best policy will be to be more proactive, stronger and braver in supporting both democratic Belarus and Ukraine. And I hope that this policy will be in place. In Poland, Lithuania, Baltic states, everyone understands why it's important to support our fight for democracy and against Russia. But when you go further to the West, there is not much understanding. And we must explain the people in the Western democratic countries why fighting tyranny, why fighting Putin is crucial for their own security too.
Mm-hmm. So now, if you were to explain that to a viewer which is very far across the Atlantic Ocean, what would you want to say to them?
To see Belarus and Ukraine as the front lines between tyranny and democracy, that the Belarusians and Ukrainians, they are fighting for your own peace, your own security, for your own values, values that Europe stands for, to support independent media, to support Army of Ukraine, to support Belarusian democratic forces, which formed basically government in exile. Right now, it's time, perhaps to sacrifice, for short term, the comfortable personal life in sake of long-lasting peace in Europe. If we don't stop two dictators right now in Europe, very soon they will knock your doors.
And now, what about, you said something like when the regimes fall, people would go out into the street, and this pact would just not, that was signed today or the one that was signed last month, nobody would even remember about them. Now, when will we see these dictatorships fall, and when will we have democracy in Belarus?
These two dictators, they are rudiments. They are, story from the past, from the Soviet past. They are old, both are sick. They do not offer any perspective to their people, their nations. And it's the matter of time when these regimes collapse. The question is how many sufferings, how many harm they will bring in these last years. We must just help them to collapse sooner, as soon as possible. And Lukashenko's dictatorship is much weaker than Putin wants. Lukashenko does not have any support inside the country. And I believe that changes in Belarus, which are very possible, I don't know what trigger will be, they will bring changes in Russia too. They will weaken Putin too, and they will help Ukraine to win too. So let's see, Belarus not only as the problem, but also as the part of the solution.
And now, what about, because it was just last month that Putin signed a decree lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, which extends Russia's nuclear umbrella to Belarus. And I mean, we have Poland, which borders Belarus. It also borders Russia with the region of Kaliningrad. I mean, just how serious and what does this mean for Poland? Is there something that Poland should maybe prepare for?
Everyone must be warned. Everyone must be prepared right now, because we don't know what dictators could do tomorrow. But these nuclear weapons in Belarus, it's like Schrodinger's cat. No one really know if they exist, if they are already in Belarus. There is so much noise, so much PR around it. So we assume that the regime, both Lukashenko and Putin, they are using nuclear weapons primarily as their propaganda tool to scare the West, to force Poland, for example, or Lithuania invest in the security instead of supporting Ukraine, but also to split the unity of the Western countries, because people are really afraid of nuclear war. So we should be also careful, when we read, when we watch what dictators are doing, and to not fall into fear. We shouldn't be afraid of dictators. We should be united, we should be strong, yes, we should be prepared, and we should support those who fight against Putin and Lukashenko.
So it's all about staying united. Now, I also wanted to ask, because since we have these two dictators that are desperate to, of course, continue having their grip on power, do you think, given this fact, that we might see maybe more acts of sabotage on Poland's territory or on Lithuania's territory, given the fact that, that Putin is desperate and he would obviously like to break this unity within the countries in the region?
Since Soviet time, Russia was always quite successful in agents' work, of course, but we shouldn't also overestimate. We shouldn't, fall into paranoia and see agents everywhere. Yes, they are powerful, they're organized, they work primarily with propaganda, trying to spoil the informational space, and force people to doubt the need to support Ukraine. But we just have to confront it with delivering the truth information, what your channel is doing, what other media are doing. Will they make more provocations? I don't think, they can do something more than they are doing right now. Of course, they will be destabilizing societies, trying to interfere into elections, but let's not fall into paranoia. These regimes are not almighty as well, and I think many people, in case of Belarus, for example, I'm talking, to many people inside Belarus and many people who work in the regime, many people just waiting for this moment, when the regime will be weak and they will be ready to defect and switch sides.
And what about, lastly, I wanted to ask, because of course we know that Belarus has a lot of political prisoners. What do we know about these people, and when do you think they might be set free? We know that Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya's husband is one of these people. Can you tell us more about their situation?
Belarus today is one of the worst jailers of innocent people in the world, of journalists, of activists, of human rights defenders. 1,400 people at least are in prisons. 7 people in last year died in prisons. People are basically tortured. Prisons are like torture chambers. And Belarusian siloviki, this security apparatus, it's like Soviet-style KGB. People live in the atmosphere of real terror. What we have to do to raise profiles, to speak about political prisoners, to put pressure on the regime through sanctions and isolations, to make them pay for every repression, for every detained person. There is Belarusian Polish journalist Andrzej Poczobut, our big friend, and Poland is doing a lot to release him as well. But there are many others. Let's speak about them. Let's not allow Lukashenko to make repressions in silence.
All right, Mr. Franak Viačorka, the advisor to exiled Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, thank you very much for speaking to us here on TVP World today.
Thank you.
And with that, it's a wrap for this edition of World Talks. But as always, do stay tuned to TVP World for more breaking news, updates, and commentary.